going to be Mr. Eisenhardt, then Ms. Sweet, and then up to the top and continuing onward. Okay, so whenever you are ready, Mr. Eisenhardt.
First of all, I'd like to thank Colby and everybody who put this together for inviting us. I'm sitting here as a first-time political candidate in a very, very distinguished company, and I'm very happy to say that if any one of these folks got elected, including me, I think we'd do a lot better than what we have now. Please, my time. I decided to run for governor because of the fact that I became outraged in learning that half of our school-age kids are going to school hungry, and also learned that we rank #1 in New England in infant mortality, and also that we have had such a struggle to get 70,000 Mainers covered under Medicaid expansion. I've got 20 years in the healthcare field. I was the CEO of a healthcare organization for 20 years, one that I founded and still in existence today. I think we have a very, very urgent need to deal with the hunger problem, and I think we also have a very urgent need to come up with alternative solutions to providing healthcare for our elderly, treating drug addiction, and treating mental health. And I feel that I have the leadership, the administrative background to do that. I also have a master's in vocational rehabilitation with an undergraduate in sociology from the University of Wisconsin. And as I said, what further outraged me, I will say, that we need to work on is when I read in the newspaper that people were being tasered, people were being pepper sprayed. We lost $53 million at Riverview. We lost another $3 million in the mismanagement of TANF money. Those are the things, if elected, that I'm going to deal with and will make a change. Thank you.
I'll take your minutes. Hi, welcome. My name is Betsy Sweet, and I am so grateful to the people who organized this, the young people, and to all of you who came tonight. It really is democracy in action, and I really appreciate that. Because I don't know about you, but how's democracy and government working for you these days? Thinking like it's all doing really well? Yeah, me either. It feels like actually the political world has gone a little mad lately. Every day is a new apocalypse of awful. We open up, listen to the TV. It just really feels like things are going crazy, not only nationally, but here in Maine, where we have accusations of sexual misconduct, where we have tax policy that's making the gap between rich and poor wider, not smaller. And here in Maine, we have a legislature that's overturning every referendum that you and I voted on in the last year, and overturning it or changing it substantially. So that all leads to a politics based on division and fear and separation from each other. And it leads us, it's politics based on asking the wrong question. What's the question we hear most often in politics now? Is who can we blame? Not how do we fix this? I didn't start out to wanting to be governor. I've been an advocate with many of you in this room, shoulder to shoulder, working on health care and civil rights and equal rights. But I feel like this is the moment in time where we have to do things differently. And one of the most important ways we have to do things differently is to get money out of politics. Every single thing that we care about, clean energy, health care, all of the things that we have all worked so hard on, so many of us care about, can't happen because big money comes in and takes over the agenda, decides what bills are going to be heard, decides who's going to decide them, and it's not you and me. It's not democracy in the hands of the people. And so that is our chance right now. We have a moment to make a change, to do something fundamentally different. We can't just rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. We need to do something really different, and getting money out of politics is our first step. I can't wait to talk about the issues with you and the questions. Thanks.
Oh. Hi down there. My name is Janet Mills. I am the Attorney General of the state of Maine, and I've spent my career both in the private sector and the public sector in trying to preserve and protect the civil rights and constitutional rights of Maine people. I grew up in a little town 38 miles from here. I did attend Colby College. I didn't stay. I dropped out and I worked, and I ended up getting a degree from UMass Boston. But you wouldn't know that from the letters I get from the Alumni Association asking for money. They think I'm rich and they think I'm an alum, but that's all right. I grew up in the town near here, and I learned about my neighborhood by delivering newspapers to my neighbors as a kid, and serving hamburger meatloaf and mac and cheese to them as a teenager at the Shiretown Diner. And I learned two things from my community in Western Maine. One is we don't tolerate bullies. not when somebody else is being bullied, not when you're being bullied. And secondly, you're expected not just to talk the talk, but to walk the walk. That's why when I got older and I saw that women's rights were not being protected in the Maine legislature, wow. I said, I co-founded the Maine Women's Lobby to make sure women's rights were protected in the legislature. I stood up to bullies as district attorney and prosecuted domestic violence cases and fought for common sense reforms of the bail laws and sentencing laws. I've taken on, as your attorney general, the big corporations on Wall Street, the pharmaceutical companies, and the biggest bully the state of Maine has ever seen, Paul R. LePage, and I have won my battles with him and with the big corporations. I will take those skills and those values to the Blaine House and be the best governor I can be for the state of Maine, because I think that the best chapter of this state's history is yet to be written, and I want to write it with you. I want to take on the opiate epidemic. I want to take on the disparity in wealth in our society. I want to take on the need for jobs, good paying jobs, so that young people can stay here. And that's one gavel, and I will cede my time. Thank you. My 10 seconds over.
Thanks for having us. My name's Adam Cody. I did graduate from Colby, and I used to be a member of the Colby Democrats. I'm glad to see the organization is alive and well. I'm also from Maine. I was born and raised in Sanford. Felt very fortunate to go to public schools from a lower income family and be able to go to school here. It really broadened my life and it made an enormous impact on it. I went on and had a background not only in the military but in public service and in renewable energy. I've worked overseas advising countries on how to write their energy laws. I've worked with renewable energy here in Maine, was recognized by President Obama as one of 12 veterans nationally that he recognized for my work in clean energy and climate change. I've had 3 combat tours with the military. I've served in Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And I feel confident that my leadership has been tested and proven in some pretty tough areas. I love the title of tonight, Revitalizing Maine and the Future Generation, because frankly, when I was, my wife and I were talking about running, really that's what it came down to for us. We're raising a young family in this state. We have 5 young kids, and our oldest is going to be graduating 10 years from now, hopefully from Colby. And our biggest concern, because we're seeing that next generation graduating ahead of us. We have a lot of friends that their kids are getting out of school, and they say it everywhere. They're all saying the same thing. Maine is the best place to live if you can make a living. And I believe we can. I believe we can have the best jobs in America right here in Maine. We've got to grow our economy, and part of it is keeping young people here to create an economy of innovators and entrepreneurs, and that's what I'd like to do as governor. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Colby Democrats, and thank you all for being here. It's pretty heartening to see the entire auditorium filled up, just about every seat. My name is Mark Eves, former Speaker of the House of the Maine State Legislature, former family therapist as well, current executive director of a wonderful organization called Woodford's Family Services that has a early intervention program right here in Waterville. Well before I thought about getting into politics in 2008, I was helping a lot of families in trouble. And I would drive out to their homes, and I'd knock on their doors, and I'd never know what was on the other side. But usually what I found was a family falling apart, whether it was domestic violence, drugs tearing apart their lives, or something a whole lot worse. But I grew up in a family. I was the youngest of 7. My dad was a military chaplain for 35 years in the Air Force. My mom was a public school teacher, and they taught us a lot of things. But one thing was, you don't give up on each other, and you look out for each other. So not knowing what was on that other side of that door, I walk through it, and I sit with families, and I listen to them, and I stick with it day after day until I start to understand what is standing in their way, and that's when you can do something about it. And I took that same approach the first time I knocked on a door in 2008 in a House district that had been held by Republicans in more than 30 years. Won that seat by taking that approach. For 8 years served in the state legislature, 4 of which worked with many of these fine people up here on this stage. We need an approach that is collaborative, that can get results. And for 4 years in the Speaker's office, that's exactly what I did. Whether it's the Affordable Senior Housing Bond that I sponsored and passed, whether it was Medicaid expansion that we put on the governor's desk 5 times and the people finally finished the job last Tuesday, those issues are important to me. I was informed by the doors that I knocked on and the conversations that I had. I will keep fighting for Maine families as I have my entire life. It's the way my parents raised me, and we're going to finish the job in 2018.
Good evening, Democrats. Who is fired up after what just happened last week, huh? My name is Diane Russell, and I am running for governor because I have seen time and time again, I have heard from people that our system has been broken. And it's not like it was a coffee cup. It didn't just fall off the side of the table and break. This was intentionally broken. The system has been rigged by the top, as Bernie would say, 1/10 of 1%. And we need to take our power back. So that's exactly why I'm running for governor. I want to talk a little bit about democracy, because that's really what we're talking about right now. And democracy itself is under attack. You know, when they tell us that we have a democracy, but we are the last country behind Syria to sign the Paris Climate Accord, that is not a democracy, because in a democracy, people rule the government. When students cannot graduate from college without massive amounts of student debt, that is not a democracy. When we're the richest country in human history and we cannot provide health care for every single person in this country, that is not a democracy. And when people go to the polls like they did last year, time and time again, and vote for referenda, and the politicians in this state vote to overturn them, that is not a democracy. That is why I have been so excited to be part of the team that's bringing the people's veto to the polls last week. We're working to make sure that we can restore democracy, that we can put power back into your hands through the ranked choice voting petition. If you haven't signed it, I have some here. I hope that my colleagues will take petitions with them and circulate. We need to make sure that we're putting power back into the hands of Maine people, because when that happens, we get to do things like provide student loan debt support. We get to make sure that people can afford to heat their homes. We can make sure that people actually have the ability to have health care without it breaking the bank. That's why I'm running, and I hope I can earn your support.
Good evening, my name is Jim Boyle. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for being here. I want to talk first about my personal reason for taking on this challenge. One Sunday morning, I got up and I read in the Maine Sunday Telegram about New Market tax credit program swindle that happened at the mill in East Millinocket where my mother was born, and my cousins worked in that. My family has worked in that mill from the time it opened in 1907 until it finally closed in 2014. There was a tax credit program, and the lawyers and the lobbyists came to the State House in Augusta and passed this law that allowed them to get this tax credit, multi-million-dollar tax credit, and then take the money out of Maine and not invest in the equipment of the mill, which ultimately closed. That's my family. That's affected me and my family. I have family scattered across the Penobscot River Valley where mills are closing. My dad's side of the family is from Rumford. And so I'm running so that the working people of the Maine that are working hard, doing the best they can to get ahead every day, year in and year out for generations, can no longer be taken advantage of by the rich people and their lobbyists and their lawyers coming into the State House and taking advantage of the rigged system that we have down there. I'm a small business owner. I think small business is the backbone of America, of Maine. I started my own small business in 1996, a wetland science and vernal pool consulting company. I've done that for 21 years, so I know how to create jobs. I've done it. My kids work here in Maine. I've hired scientists to come from outside Maine to come to work here. High-paying science jobs, technology jobs, and so I'm offering that skill set to the people of the state of Maine. I want to make sure people understand. I've been in the state senate. I know how it can be. I know good people run for good reasons, but the system is rigged, and we need to change it. Thank you.
So, our first question, Mr. Boyle is going to start. What would you say is the most critical issue facing the state, and what will you do about it?
Well, the most critical issue facing the state in terms of state government, I'd say, is that what I just talked about, the system is rigged. I mean, I was in the state senate for 2 years. I can tell you, just, if you wouldn't believe it, I couldn't believe it the first time I walked through the hallway. I left a meeting, and the bell's ringing to go to the Senate chamber, and you walk out in the hall from the meeting room, and both sides, there's a gauntlet to run of lobbyists, both sides. Mostly men, trying to get your attention, grabbing your arm, can I have a minute of your time? And, you know, there's a problem with a system like that. I couldn't believe it the first time I saw it, and if you haven't done it, it's a real education. I suggest you do it sometime. So the issues that we have about jobs and healthcare expansion that we just passed, and then it gets flipped. I mean, that's why we keep having these problems year in and year out, is that we keep sending people who are there as part of the system. We need to change the system. We need to send people who will represent the working people of Maine and not the corporations and their lobbyists and the wealthy people who can afford to hire those people to work for them. When the senior citizens and the kids and the working people of Maine, they can't be going to Augusta, you know, chasing politicians around the hallways. They've got to work for a living. So we need people that are down there in Augusta, elected to represent and speak for all the people of Maine, the working people of Maine, not just the rich.
So next is Mr. Eisenhardt.
Thank you. You know, listening to the other speakers here, the terms rigged democracy, we don't have a democracy, big money. I don't know how many people here have read the book by Jane Mayer. It's called Dark Money. In this state, we have the influence of the Koch brothers. We have the influence of the Koch brothers through the Maine Heritage Policy Center. We have the influence of the Koch brothers through the Heritage Foundation that recently made a contribution to the Republican candidate. We have the influence of two caucuses in our state legislature, and that's the Americans for Prosperity Caucus and the ALEC Caucus. And it's very hard to find out which legislator belongs to that caucus. And what we get from those folks is no. And the mission, according to Jane Mayer, and she traces back the history of the Koch brothers back to 1980, their mission in life is, they're libertarians, and their mission in life is to tear down government, federal and state. You've got people like Ted Cruz in Washington. You've got other folks down there that no matter what Obama tried to do, they obstructed it. And the same thing is true here in Maine. And those of you that are in the legislature, like Jim was just talking about, you have the best argument in the world, and it doesn't make any difference. The answer is no, we're not voting for it. So there has to be an answer to that. Our governor was able to he came to his first term in office, he somehow amassed enough money to give himself $247,000 contribution to his own campaign. Now, I know Martin didn't pay that kind of money, and neither did the mayor of Waterville. So I think if I were elected, well, the first thing I would do is try to expose the influence of the Koch brothers. They're billionaires. They rank the 6th richest people in the country, and I think they have a stranglehold not only on this state, but in other states where the same type of stuff comes out in Wisconsin, it comes out in Kansas, the same type of legislation. Thank you.
So I think that there are two different things. One is the process and how we do democracy, and the other is an issue. In terms of the process, we've all talked about getting money out of politics, but there's just two of us up here who are actually running a clean elections campaign to get money out of politics. So instead of calling people, talk about walk the walk, instead of calling people and spending your time in a room dialing for dollars every day, calling up and calling people you know and you don't know, it's a horrible process. You can ask any of these people who are doing it for big dollars, thousands of dollars at a time. Clean elections candidates call and get thousands of people to give $5 to be invested in democracy. And so when we get elected then, we are beholden only to the people of Maine, only to the thousands of people that we get to talk to and that we get to get invested in this campaign and in our democracy. So I think that's the process. In terms of policy, I think the number one issue we have to deal with is healthcare. Because healthcare is the bottom line for everybody. If we can't be well, if we can't be healthy, if we can't get sick and know that we can get help, or our kids are sick, or our parents, and can get help, the help that they need to get better, then we don't have any kind of security. When people ask me the most important economic development tool we have in Maine, it's healthcare. Because people stay in jobs that they hate because they have to keep their healthcare. They stay in relationships that are unsafe because they will have to keep their healthcare. We have tons of amazing entrepreneurs in this state. I have met some of the most incredible people doing this campaigning, but they can't start their own business. They are afraid they can't afford to do their own business because they can't afford the healthcare. So I think taking care of healthcare, doing universal coverage in Maine, and maybe we do a compact, I've talked to some people about doing a compact in New England to do universal healthcare so that we can provide that for our citizens. And we'll never get it. The reason we don't have universal healthcare in Maine is the only state in the country in the world, that doesn't do it, is because of money and politics. So those two things are connected.
Ms. Mills.
Oh, thank you. The question is, what's the most important issue facing the state of Maine, and what would you do about it? Well, the first and foremost most important issue facing us is the opiate epidemic, and it relates to healthcare coverage, obviously. But 185 people, Maine people, died the first 6 months of this year. It's about one a day, more than one a day actually. If 185 baby seals showed up dead on the shores of Cape Elizabeth, we would be marching in the streets wondering what the heck can we do about this? We'd be stopping everything. We've got to have an all hands on deck approach to this epidemic. And it does mean expanding health care, and I'm so happy that the referendum passed the other day, because that will help a certain group of people who do need substance abuse treatment. We've got to increase the number of detox beds and the kinds of therapies we're providing. We've got to provide medication-assisted treatment right at the ERs where people are found overdosing and revived. When the governor said Narcan doesn't save lives, it just postpones death, that's why I went out and bought a room full of Narcan from pharmaceutical settlements. And as I said, we've saved 291 lives with that Narcan. We do what we can do in the positions we're in. That's the most immediate problem. The other issue, more generically, is the economy. Sure, we have a low unemployment rate, and we have some high-tech jobs moving into southern Maine, but we've got to spread the wealth. I see people working 2 and 3 part-time jobs just to get by. So it's the cost of living as well as the wages that are somewhat depressed. So we've got to provide the high-tech jobs that will attract young people and help people stay here and raise their families here. I have 4 beautiful grandchildren in the state of Maine. I want this to be a state where they can raise their families, a state of opportunity, where we can protect our natural resources and expand the infrastructure we need, like broadband, most importantly, in all our towns and cities, to allow people to conduct business and encourage new technology jobs and good paying jobs and benefits. And that helps keep people away from the opiate epidemic too.
I think the most important issue facing the state of Maine is our inability to grow our economy. We have the oldest population in the country. We have a stagnant population. So many of the things that are being discussed here today, whether it's healthcare, support for those that are in the greatest need, the ability to do that will come from growing our economy. And I think that in order to get good quality, high-paying jobs here, we need a smart, progressive approach to growing it. And it really is in 3 phases. The first is infrastructure. We have one of the worst broadband infrastructures in the country, and whether it's healthcare, telemedicine, or frankly, if you just want to sell blueberries outside your hometown, you need high-quality broadband, and we need to do that. The second is I travel throughout the state and I talk to anybody in every business, every sector. It's workforce training. We have such a problem attracting, retaining, and preventing the attrition in our businesses. And that comes from a good education policy that starts with universal pre-K, but also addresses the 53-year-old mill worker that gets out of, loses a job in a mill town, isn't going to go to a 4-year school, won't even go to a 2-year community college. It doesn't make sense, but a 6-year training program in the trades would make a ton of sense. It's harder to get a plumber, electrician, a mason, a finished carpenter in many of our towns throughout the state as it is to find a lawyer. So it's a comprehensive approach to workforce training that we really need to have. And lastly, we need to start focusing on our competitive advantages. We need to start looking at what it is we do well in a global economy. And I'll tell you a couple things culturally we've got to stop doing. We've got to stop saying we've never done it that way before. We have that endemic in our culture in Maine. And lastly, we've got to stop saying people are from away. Really, it's a bit of a joke sometimes that people use it, but my wife's from Colombia. She's been here over 20 years, and I would love it if somebody called her a Mainer just once, because we need to grow our economy, and we're going to need exciting people who come in from other parts of the world and other parts of the country that want to do that with us. So those are the big issues facing us as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, and I agree, it's all about the economy. It's all about growing our pie so that we can take care of our citizens in a way that we need to, whether it's about expanding healthcare or addressing our opioid crisis. And Adam's right about the fact that our state is the oldest state in the nation. The fact that in 10 years, in 5 to 10 years, 50% of our workforce is eligible to retire. And that brings it into sharp focus for me. If we built a wall, and I've been talking about building a wall here in Maine, from New Hampshire to Canada, and didn't let one of our kids leave for 20 years, every single kid that was born here, my kids, Adam's kids, everybody's nephews and everybody, stayed here and get plugged into the workforce, that wouldn't meet half of the workforce need that we are going to need just to replace workers that are retiring. That, I think, is the canary in the coal mine. That is what is not being talked about. The Maine State Chamber is starting to talk about this. This is not a partisan issue. This is something that we can tackle together as Republicans and Democrats and independents. Senior issues and aging issues are something that I worked a lot on in the Speaker's office for 4 years. Built a coalition of Republicans and Democrats inside and outside of the building. And one of those individuals was a very conservative Senate Republican named Dave Burns from Washington County. We agreed and decided and made a commitment to one another that we were not going to make this a partisan issue at all. Too much was at stake. We cared about our communities. We cared about seniors that were living in our communities, and we wanted to do something for them. Together, we were able to build a coalition and work together to pass 17 pieces of legislation, one of which was the Affordable Senior Housing Bond, get it on the ballot, and nearly 70% of you all voted for that. That bond sits on the governor's desk today. No movement, no action. It is that type of coalition building that focuses on solving real issues and real problems for our state that I would like to bring to the office.
Yeah, this is a really important question, and you know, how to pick one is really hard. I mean, for me, I think that Medicare for all is the top priority that we need to move forward. We need to make sure that every single person has access to health care. But we also need to have a conversation about wealth inequality, because that's happening not just here, it's happening across the country. States are the place where innovation is happening. We hear about this issue, you know, when you have CEOs who are making significantly higher wages than their average workers, and you know, when you're making 400 times the amount that your minimum wage worker is, what incentive does that provide to help those lower paid workers, right? So I'd like to introduce and pass legislation that reforms the corporate tax breaks that are out there and ties that to the wealth inequality. You know, for the folks and a lot of these folks are going to be businesses that are right here in Maine that were started here. For small businesses that are paying their workers a real wage, that are paying them in a way that the CEOs are not making some huge amount more than their median worker is, they will get better tax breaks. But for those folks that are coming in from out of state, those multinational corporations that are externalizing all their costs, like making sure that their employees get food stamps so that they don't have to pay their employees more, making sure that their employees get Medicaid so that they don't have to pay their employees more. Maybe if they just paid their employees more, people would be in a better position. So instead, we would tax those companies that have massive CEO salaries at a significantly higher rate than the small businesses here in Maine that are actually investing in their workforce. That's one area that we can be a leader on innovation, and we can start to chip away at the wealth inequality, which I think is something that we have to address. We have to address it as a country, but more importantly, we need to start addressing it right here in the state, and Maine has consistently been a leader. So Medicare for all is my top priority, but we really need to have a conversation about wealth inequality and what that looks like to make sure that Maine people have real jobs.